Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Korman Productions, here to talk about This Is Us, Season 5, Episode 15, titled Jerry 2.0. Before going any further, I will tell you two things. One, this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't yet watched that episode, please go and do so, and then come back and watch mine. Secondly, if you like this video, please hit me up with a like, a share, a comment, and please subscribe to my channel. The format to this video is going to be similar to last week, and partially for the same reasons. I still am working a lot of hours, but also because a lot of the scenes aren't worth talking about individually. It's all leading to one great scene, and there's a couple other great scenes after that are also worth talking about. But on the whole, a lot of this is just setup for the finale. And setup for what happens later in the episode. But before we get into any of that, let's talk about the title of this episode. When I saw it, I was like, what in the world does that mean? And it becomes pretty clear what it means pretty early on. It stems from a movie that Jack and Kevin saw just before he died, in Jerry Maguire, and one that meant something to him and carried on through his teens and through his life. Jerry Maguire being the 1996 movie starring Tom Cruise, Renee Zellweger, and Cuba Gooding Jr., as well as Regina King, who of course I could not go without mentioning because she's actually referenced within the course of this episode. The story of this one centers around all the men going to the Bachelor party, which is basically just a little trip to the cabin, as well as the woman doing the Bachelorette party at the same time. Not too much happens at the Bachelorette party other than Madison encountering somebody that she used to date and eventually ghosted her, which is a term that Rebecca did not know. This is your daily reminder that Rebecca is kind of old. Kevin and Madison's stories seem to be on diverging paths here. Kevin seems to, at the end, have overcome his self-doubt, or at least it seems like he's on the path to it, whereas Madison is going the opposite direction. She starts off relatively competent, and then by the end is a little less certain, from appearances anyway, about her upcoming wedding with Kevin. Early on in this episode, Sophie, played by Alexandra Breckenridge, calls Kevin to congratulate him on his upcoming marriage. I kind of thought that Sophie would play a bigger role in this episode than she did, but this is the only time in the episode that we actually see her. But the effect of this one conversation vibrates through the rest of the episode. Their call is interrupted by Madison and Kevin having to go deal with the true horrors of parenting. Some kind of bathroom thing. We don't get details. I'd rather not have them anyway. Kevin is going to the bachelor party with cold feet. Miguel is going to spend the episode worrying about Rebecca and her health because they haven't been apart forever. Toby is going to be quietly seething because he's miserable as a stay-at-home dad and he doesn't want to say anything to Kate. And this silence is going to ruin his marriage, especially with what he does later. But we'll get into that. Beth is in career limbo and Rebecca is feeling oppressed by everybody's concern about her illness, specifically Miguel, but it goes to the entire family as well, who have stopped asking for help from her, for babysitting help with the kids, so on and so forth, because they don't want to be a burden. They don't want to add to her troubles. But all Rebecca wants is a sense of normalcy. She doesn't want to be reminded constantly that she has this illness. And inadvertently, her family is doing that to her, including Miguel, who simply loves her and is well-meaning, but nevertheless, he's part of Rebecca's issue here. The only one who seems untroubled in this episode is Randall, who is scarily happy throughout this episode. So the boys are headed to the cabin, where unfortunately things are going to take a turn because it's going to rain, forcing them to pretty much stay inside. But before that happens, Randall points out to him that Kevin did it. He achieved what he set out to do in what he told Randall he wanted back in last season's mid-season finale. That by the time he turned 40, he wanted to be married with kids. And that's when we discovered that that was going to happen for Kevin, though we didn't know the details just yet. And as I recall, Randall laughed at Kevin during this and kind of made fun of him a little bit. As well he should have. I said back then, during that episode, that this was a very rushed timeline. And that still holds. It seems like Kevin and Madison are beating the odds for now, but they have certainly put doubts into that heading into the finale. And one question before actually moving on. What exactly is the rush to get married? Why are they doing this now? Why couldn't they have a longer engagement? Well, the real answer is that because they need something to happen in the finale. But the real world explanation, I couldn't tell you. I don't know quite why they need to rush it like this. So, at the cabin, in two different timelines, the boys watch Jerry Maguire, a movie, as I said, that Kevin once watched with Jack. And Jack is only a cameo in this episode, just like the previous one. We're actually seeing way less of Jack in the back half of the season. And I quite honestly don't miss him when he's not on screen. As I've said many times, we've really played Jack off as a character. We've said all there is to say about him. Occasionally, they still make good use of him. And I've been saying that they should limit how much he appears. If you have something to say about the character, by all means, show him. Give him a good storyline. But otherwise, he doesn't need to be in every single episode. There are plenty of regulars on this show that do not appear in every single episode. For instance, the guys who play the late teen versions of the Big Three, Logan Schroyer, Hannah Zeal, and Niles Fitch, who we didn't even really see very much of in the first half of the season, but towards the tail end, we've been seeing them way more. In the teen timeline, Kevin is still enthusing about what a great movie it is, to a pair of less than impressed Randall and Beth, who sort of make fun of him for his enthusiasm for it. They've only taken away the romance between Cuba Gooding Jr. and Regina King. Those are the actors in the film. They've taken to calling themselves Regina and Cuba. In the present day timeline, after they finish watching the movie, Randall says that the movie still holds up, but he's sorry that Cuba Gooding Jr. and Regina King did not get a sequel, because he would have watched the heck out of that. And he asks Kevin what he thinks. Does he think it still holds up? And Kevin's like, yep, of course, yeah, it still holds up, still good. But not with the same level of enthusiasm that he once did, which is something that Randall points out. Nikki points out that this is practically the story of his life. When questioned, Nikki says, well, guy falls for a kid, or in your case, the idea of kids, though at this point the kids are born, so he's fallen for the kids, more than he does for the actual girl in the story. But he sticks by her just because he's trying to do the right thing. You're like Jerry Maguire 2.0, hence the title of the episode. Now listen, I love Nicky. I really do. I love his character. I'm glad he's around. I wanted him to be around. But years of isolation have made him a very off-putting person. And maybe has people, or rather him, occasionally saying things that he shouldn't be saying. This is an example of that. Nevertheless, Kevin blowing up at him the way he does wouldn't happen if it weren't for the doubts that Zoe put in his head, if it weren't from the phone call from Sophie, if it weren't from the general pressure of getting married, which, while a joyous event, is definitely a pressure-filled situation. If it weren't for those things, Kevin doesn't blow up at Nikki the way he does over these comments. Because Nikki makes these kind of comments all the time, and for the most part, Kevin just lets him slide on it. Before the blow-up takes place, Miguel gets a text about Rebecca, and he says, "Good news. She's fine. She's painting a naked man with the other wives." And it's just funny how cheerfully unbothered he is by that. I mean, at this point, Miguel is too old to be jealous or anything like that, but his line delivery is just hilarious here. After Kevin starts popping off, Randall suggests that he go and take a breather. A couple of scenes later, we have a really great Rebecca and Beth scene. And we get two of them within the course of this episode. And we really don't get enough of this pairing. We don't see them together often enough. Anyway, Beth has been reaching out to a job recruiter, and the recruiter came back with some listings for some very traditional dance conservatories. Rebecca thinks that this is great news, but Beth isn't quite so certain. Because as she puts it, these dance academies took something that she loved and made it completely joyless. She says it's a broken system and she doesn't want anything to do with it. Rebecca takes a breath and goes on to tell her that she, Beth, is a very impressive person. She goes on to say that the mom she is, the career woman that she is, the wife she is to a man who is a bit of a full-time job in his own right. She suggests that if these traditional dance academies are broken, that Beth should go and change them. Go in there and do what you always do. Blow us all away. A couple of scenes later, we get a scene in the past timeline with the older teenagers. For context that I haven't yet given you, Sophie and Kevin are having issues because Kevin keeps saying, "Hey, long-distance relationships, no big deal. And I'm back for now, but probably not for good." So after watching Jerry Maguire, he goes off and writes a mission statement, like the character. And he reads a nice little speech to Sophie. And it is indeed a nice little speech. But it's sort of hollow at the same time. Because this Kevin is not the Kevin that is willing to put in the work to make a successful marriage. This Kevin will ultimately not make his marriage to Sophie work. We know this already. It's just an example of the Pearsons being great speech makers. But that's all this is. A great speech. Kevin might think that this is deep and that this will fix everything. But ultimately, it won't. Meanwhile, in the present-day timeline, Randall has gone to check on Kevin and informs him that Nikki found some firewood and they're going to make a fire outdoors. Randall suggests that it might be a caveman-esque peace offering from Nikki. Kevin has found his old mission statement that he once read to Sophie. He hands it over to Randall and says, "It's embarrassing." Randall laughs while reading it and says, "Nah, it's not. It's romantic." And it's at this point that Kevin admits to what's eating him. He tells him about the phone conversation with Sophie and he asked the question, how do you know who you're supposed to marry? Well, Kevin, I would say that you're a celebrity, a rich one at that. And they tend to have like 3, 4, 5 wives. So this being only your second marriage, you have like 3 more to go. As far as my real answer, well, the one time I got married, it didn't exactly work out. I don't regret it because I have my daughter Julia as a result of it. I'm not sure that I can give you a real answer. I'm not sure that you could actually tell who you were supposed to marry, if it's going to work out or not. I mean, there are signs that you could look for that you will probably likely miss because you're too close to the situation. Red flags, warning signs. Those things exist, I'm sure. Your friends are certainly capable of noticing it because they are not as close to the situation. They may or may not tell you so. Honestly, it's a hard question. Not one with an easy answer. I mean, perhaps there are no warning signs or red flags, and you get married and it still doesn't work out. Because there's a variety of things that could happen in your lives that could cause your marriage to break down. Maybe you just end up drifting apart. Who knows? Randall doesn't attempt to answer this question. Not here anyway. He tells Kevin to follow him. And Kevin really is a quiet MVP of this episode. He takes Kevin out to where all the men are, sitting by the fire. He announces to the group that Kevin is having a classic case of cold feet. And I will say that what Kevin is experiencing here is also normal. Randall announces to the crowd that Kevin needs a good talking to, and Kevin insists that he's fine. But Randall says, no, you are not fine. You are a mess. Well, tell me something I don't know about him, Randall. And as for the rest of you, you're not on top of your game either. Miguel, you've been obsessing over our mother since you got here. Toby, you're missing the quality that you typically have that makes you great to be around. That is not exactly what he says. He has some fancy word that I've never heard before, but that's essentially what he's trying to say to Toby. Alright, so I went back and watched with the subtitles, and I got what he says. He says, je ne sais quoi, which the dictionary says means something such as an appealing quality that cannot be adequately described or expressed. I'd say that about sums up Toby. And as far as Nicky goes, well, he's always odd. Yes, he is. Randall asked the assembled group who would like to say something first, and Nicky chimes in to say that this is the lamest bachelor party ever, and he's never even been to one. Randall gently tells him to shut the heck up, and once again asks who's first. Toby is the first to speak. He says that he is the biggest rom-com fan ever, and normally he despises people who poke holes at the romantic ending. But after watching that movie, he thinks that the couple will never make it. That none of the problems that existed before have been solved. It was just one incredible speech. Much like what happens with the Pearsons, what they are able to produce with their speeches. The whole adorable family he sees in a boat, and the boat is filled with holes. There's a bit of a pause after Toby's speech, and he apologizes. He admits to being in a weird place. He needs a job. He needs it for financial stability and his sanity. And there are no nibbles except for a job in San Francisco, which is clearly a non-starter for a parent of 2 kids under the age of 2. Randall assures him that he will be okay, that the 2 of them will weather the storm. He promises. Toby kind of gives a little nod. I don't think he believes what Randall says. Nicky is the next to speak. He says that the movie put him in a really bad mood. All romantic comedies do. He just can't relate to them. He had one relationship 50 years ago with Sally Brooks, which we saw portrayed a couple of episodes ago. And he blew it. There's no second chances. There's no happy endings. He lost the girl. He turns to Kevin and says, I think that's why I said all that stuff to you. Well, I'm sure there's that, and the fact that he basically doesn't have any tact. And he apologizes. He says, I'm sorry. And in response, Kevin says, maybe you're on to something. Would Madison and I be together if life hadn't thrown us together? I don't know. And the last to speak is Miguel, who says that when he and his mother got together, he remembers thinking a lot about that expression, written in the stars. He had always loved that expression. The idea that the universe had big plans for 2 strangers long before they ever crossed paths. I remember thinking, that's how it was for your mom and dad. Written in the stars. I knew it wasn't like that for me and her. It was strange the way we came together. I knew that. I was filled with doubt on our wedding day, and many days after. But then the years went by, and I realized that yes, it's okay. There are some love stories that are written in the stars. There are other love stories that are written together. 2 people that the universe had no plans for, writing their stories together in the stars. That's pretty fantastic too, isn't it? I think Jerry and Dorothy made it, Kevin. I really do. What a fantastic speech for Miguel. The character that I so often say is ignored and not given enough to do. When he does, he just totally knocks it out of the park. I hope Miguel will get the focus that he deserves next season. The final season. Toby wasn't really helpful. Nicky wasn't that much better. They both really added to Kevin's doubt more than anything, but they were honest to how they felt. Miguel was the one that came through and said the right things. The group all end up laughing, starting with Toby. Randall says that this is the strangest bachelor party in history, and Kevin, with an amused tone, says that it's borderline awful. And then Toby asks if the non-alcoholics can have a beer. And end scene. This scene was worth the price of admission for this episode, all on its own. Most of what was going on in this episode was leading directly here. And it's a terrific scene. When we come back from break, we have another Beth and Rebecca scene. And I pretty much already talked about the content of this scene. It's basically where Rebecca expresses that she feels oppressed almost by Miguel for his constant worrying, and the family refusing, or not refusing so much, not asking Rebecca to watch their kids or for help because they don't want to be a burden on her. It's another great scene between the two. The best scene in the episode, no doubt, was the fireside chat with the guys. That was where the whole episode was going when it comes down to it. But there are a couple of great scenes between Beth and Rebecca, and it emphasizes the bond between the two. And we don't see that nearly often enough, as I've already expressed. And like I said, it's another great scene. We cut to a scene with Kate and Madison. And Kate asks the question that she would have asked a long time ago if it hadn't been about her brother. But she asks, "Are you happy? Is Kevin the right guy?" And Madison gives a speech where she basically says she didn't know what to expect from him, but he definitely came through. And I absolutely love the guy. We cut to Miguel calling Rebecca. Rebecca saying that she had a great day, and Miguel apologizing for driving her crazy with his constant worry. It's just that, and he doesn't get a chance to finish his sentence because Rebecca finishes it for him. It's hard to live in limbo, not knowing how much time they're going to have. And the fact of the matter is that you never know how much time you're going to have because your number could be up at any time. But in Rebecca's case, she has a very clear expiration date. Her disease will eventually take her ability to remember things, her ability to remember her kids, her ability to remember Miguel and possibly Jack, as some have speculated. Her disease is a reminder that their time together is finite. And even without the disease, our time is finite. We have a brief cut back to the past timeline where Miguel calls Rebecca at the cabin. I guess he didn't know that they were going on vacation and he got worried. Which showcases that Miguel has been worrying about Rebecca for a long time now. Long before they were ever even a thing. Long before it was even possible for them to be a thing. Back in the present day, Miguel asks Rebecca, "How does the sky look there?" And Rebecca says that it's beautiful. She asks Miguel the same question. And Miguel answers, "Same. You can really see the stars tonight." Cut to Nicky, who is playing with his phone. We don't know what he's doing, but he looks at it with a certain amount of urgency. The door opens to reveal Miguel, and Miguel asks Nicky what he's up to. And Nicky, being Nicky, he can't resist acting like a weirdo, acting all paranoid like, "Nothing, what do you mean? I'm not doing nothing." And Miguel is just like about to say something more, but then he's just like, "Good night." And we have some great background acting from John Hurtis as Miguel, as we see him kind of shaking his head. He's not at the forefront of the scene. Nicky is, but we see Miguel in the background. And it's a nice little touch. And a reminder that Nicky is very much an off-putting character, as I've said more than a few times during the course of this video. So what is Nicky doing? He's looking up Sally Brooks. And he's had some hits, but I wouldn't say that's an uncommon name, so any one of these people could be her. So it seems that Nicky is going to go in search of his long-lost love, as some fans called way back during that Nicky-centric episode. And then we cut to Toby. Toby, who's making a call to the job offer in San Francisco, saying he would like to be considered for the job. Toby, this is the absolute wrong way to go. You do not make a decision like that without talking to your spouse, which you should have been doing for at least the last 3 episodes. Madison and him had that conversation in which they each suggested that they had to be honest. Madison was. She benefited from it. Toby wasn't. he's continuing to not be honest. He's not talking to Kate about how he really feels and what he really wants. This is the wrong way to go. Toby and Kate live in LA. And I checked via maps. I plugged in random locations in Los Angeles versus San Francisco. So this is not exactly totally accurate. But from LA to San Francisco, which I assume would be the border, takes about 5 hours. Actually, more like 6, because it was 5.42 hours. Depending on where they live, this is either give or take. So let's just say that the commute is 6 hours. That is not a reasonable commute. If you have a 9 to 5 job, your entire day would either be commuting to work, working, and then commuting home. So what are your options at that point? Either you move alone to San Francisco and come and see your wife and kids every once in a while, which would put a strain on your marriage for sure. Or you as a family move to San Francisco. This is not unreasonable if you've talked to your spouse about this. But as it stands, Kate has just found a job that seems to be her calling. She's finally found her place. The absolute best case scenario as a result of what you're doing here is you get the job, you spring it on Kate saying you guys have to move, you fight a little bit, she decides to go with you, but she resents the heck out of you for the rest of your life. That's the absolute best scenario. It all comes down to communicating with your spouse, which you have absolutely failed to do the past 3 episodes about how you are actually feeling. This couple has always looked doomed to me. It's never seemed like a healthy relationship, though throughout this season, they've done a reasonably good job of pretending to be a functioning family unit. But here's another example why they ultimately do not work as a couple. And this is on Toby this time. But we'll see where this goes in the finale. We see Randall and Kevin in the room at the cabin together. Randall is texting his wife, calling her Regina, and she responds, "That's a very old reference." I guess that never really took between the two of them. And Kevin is looking at his phone. He's looking at Sophie's number. And he comes to a conclusion. He deletes it off his phone. Though the number's still there, it's still in his call log, so nothing's preventing him from still calling her. But he's clearly making a decision here that Madison is the one for him. However, we see a scene of Madison, who's looking at video from the newlywed game. One of Kevin's answers is, the question is, what will your life look like after you guys become empty nesters? And Kevin's answer is, well, that's a trick question, because I'm never going to go get old. Something about that answer seems to bother Madison. Maybe she feels that the reason he can't answer it, or the way he answers the way he does, is because he doesn't see a long-term life for them. Because perhaps he doesn't really love her. Maybe he doesn't feel the way that she does. So going into the finale, we have Kevin seemingly committed to the idea of marrying Madison. He's made up his mind about that. Sophie apparently is going in the other direction. Boy, this finale is going to be stressful. That much I can tell you. It could go anywhere. And that is where the episode ends. A decent episode, mostly strengthened on the back of a couple of really great scenes. One great scene in particular, the fireside chat between all the men. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Korman Productions. You can join my 2 Facebook groups, the Korman Productions page, as well as the This Is Us discussion page. You can buy something from the Korman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Korman Productions, signing off.